I don't know. Well, it's on. Well, it's on. It's not on very loud, but it's on.
So, you know,
It's on. So, so, okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Everybody's just talking. Everybody's just talking. It used to mean there was a weather change coming, but I don't. The kids are restless and everybody's chatty, but I don't think that's the case this week, is it? No, I don't think that's the case. I'm ready. That I'm ready for. Hey, you staying out of trouble? Silly question. Hey, they were square dancing yesterday and you weren't involved at the fort.
I haven't been involved for quite a
It
long
was
while.
a bunch out of Marble Falls called Country Cousins, I think.
That's a
Was
group
that-
I dance with.
So they were doing their thing at the fort. They did a good job.
Good. I'm
Yeah.
glad.
No, they did a good job. They were up underneath that pavilion and they just started twirling right before the gunfight. It was a good day.
I was planning on being there, but that was before my last fall.
Yeah, spinning around on a concrete floor is probably not a good idea. Just, I found that to be true. All right, good morning. Everybody's talking too much. That's okay. The longer they talk, the less I have to. Which is okay. Because my chapter's really easy. Yeah, he gave me the easy one. All right, can anybody tell me where we are? I wasn't paying attention last week. So we're up to Daniel 6. Does anybody remember what happened at the very end of Daniel 5? Because we had the handwriting on the wall, and let's look at Daniel 5 at the very end, chapter. Let's look at verse 30. That same night Belshazzar the Chaldean king was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at the age of 62. So we've had a changing of the guard. To Darius the Mede, some called him Darius the Great. He's got all kinds of names. But he becomes the new king. So that gets us to chapter 6. So we're just going to plow through chapter 6 real quick and then we'll unravel it a little bit. So let's just read together chapter 6. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against this Daniel, unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: "King Darius, live forever." All the commissioners in the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the high officials, and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days, shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now, in his roof chamber, he had windows open towards Jerusalem, And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days, is to be cast into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel, and even until sunset he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or statute which the king establishes may be changed. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting. No entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn at the break of day and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near to the den of Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, inasmuch as I was found innocent before him. And also towards you, O king, I have committed no crime. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. The king then gave orders, and they brought those men who had maliciously accused Daniel, and they cast him, their children, and their wives into the lion's den, and they had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who are living in the land, may your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel enjoyed success in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. There's a lot to unwind there. And we can tell Pat we got through chapter 6. So, box checked. So, let's just start at the beginning of the chapter and kind of talk about Darius. Darius was known as Darius the Great, Darius the Mede. He's actually had some other names in history. But he was actually very significant in biblical events. We're going to talk about him with other aspects of Jewish life here in a little bit. But Darius was no dummy. And one of the things that is his enduring legacy is Darius was very organized and believed in a good, strong organization and he was a good boss. Letting his people do the work, letting his people do, kind of the hands-off boss, stay out of their way, and let them do their thing. So, he gets into office, if you will, takes the throne, and one of the first things he does is appoint 120 satraps. Anybody got an idea what a satrap is? It's basically a governor. Yeah, it's a. They're like, it's If he's the CEO, it's a bunch of COOs, Chief Operating Officers. 120 of them. So he splits them up. You know, the Persian territory is pretty big, so they need a lot of people. And then over them, he does what? He appoints a commission of 3 people, one of which is our friend Daniel. So, Daniel's basically on the group of men second only to the king, right? There's a, and I think it's fascinating. And it starts in verse 3. It says, "Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself." I'm not sure why this Daniel, but if anybody has some insight, that is kind of interesting. But they use that several times where they go, not just Daniel, but this Daniel. Well, this Daniel starts doing what Daniel does. He starts making himself indispensable. He starts excelling at everything he does. He becomes the best of the best. And how does that go over? Not so good. Now we're introduced to some politics, aren't we? Because somebody's getting their twinkle toes stepped on. All of a sudden, they're not as cool as Daniel. Or they're not as regarded as Daniel. And I'm sure Daniel's probably not standing there at the corner going, right? Daniel's just being Daniel. Now, we kind of talked about how old he is last week. You might remember what the age was we had kind of arrived at last in chapter 5. Somebody remember how old he was? He was like in his 80s. So probably by now he's knocking 100. He's knocking 100 years old. He's seen things, he's done things. He's probably very wise, and he's probably very efficient. He's been doing this for a long time, and he's trusted by the king, obviously, to be appointed as one of these commissioners. But still, what's their reaction to, instead of learning from him and trying to maybe, I don't know, mimic some of their actions after him, what's their reaction? Daniel got to go. Daniel's got to go. So, so what they try first? They go, well, we're going to, let's catch him doing something administratively, or misinterpreting a law, or, I don't know, getting out of bed on the wrong side, or walking on the wrong side of the street, or anything. And they found what? Nothing. That had to have been very irritating. So plan B. So they said, you know what? Let's catch him on this God thing. It's come up before. He seemed to be pretty adamant and sticking to that. Let's use that against him. So they go to King Darius and they say, what do they say? King, you need to make a law that does what? So for 30 days, just 30 days, you know, they're being very reasonable, they think. And it goes, not forever. It's just for 30 days. If you catch somebody worshiping somebody else, anybody else, then they get to be killed. King Darius says, and I'm not sure why he says this, or why he does this, but he does. He says, okay. And I don't know if they worded it strange or if they snuck in that language on him. I don't know. Because as we're going to talk about King Darius a little bit, this is a little out of character for him. Where he says, okay, that's it. For 30 days, it's just me. I don't know why he agreed to it. It's God's timing, I assume, that maybe he's you're going to use this obviously for good. So he signs the injunction. In verse 10. And of course, in verse 8, they make it very clear that once you sign it, no take-backs. Which I always thought was odd because the king's like, but I'm the king. But they go, oh, according to the Medes and the Persians, once you sign it, it's done. Even the king can't pull it back. They make that clear twice. So they're setting the snare. And there's King Darius signs it. It becomes law. In verse 10, now when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, so they didn't sneak it past him. They did not tell him. Daniel knows what the law says. What's Daniel's reaction? He doesn't change a thing, does he? He knows it is punishable by death for just the next 30 days. What would I find myself, what would my reaction be when it's like, I just got to change my behavior for 1 month and then I can go back? How tempting would that be? For me, it would be tempting. Just not to make a fuss, 30 days. I'll just be quiet about it for 30 days and then I can go back and go, I'm back, Lord. Is that kind of how we respond as human beings? It's very much in our nature to negotiate.
And so I'm going to negotiate to get more of what I want than what they want.
I'm sorry, say again? Right. Right. I mean, he's not only, he's like, he's essentially going, ha ha, watch. And does his thing, knowing that there's probably standing outside going, oh, winter's up. And then they move in they're waiting for him to do this. He knows this. Because Daniel's always been one step ahead. But if we haven't learned anything from this book, Daniel is always one step ahead. Or at least able to catch up quickly. So, they caught him. They go straight to the king and go, remember that thing you said no one could do for 30 days? Daniel's doing it. He got to go. But not just not just fire him or take away his commissionership or exile him somewhere, but they want him dead. Because they made sure that part was put into that rule, that law, that you will die. Now, earlier kings, think back to chapters 1 through 5. How were kings generally when it came to Daniel's God? How did they react to Daniel's God until they were brought correct by Daniel's God? Their first reaction was always, it's about me, right? It's not about God. Your first reaction is that's your God, you know the rules. It's a very antagonistic, what's the word I'm looking for? Antagonistic reaction to Daniel's God. What about King Darius? King Darius the Mede, Darius the Great. Look in verse starting in 14. What was his reaction? The word the New American Standard uses is distressed. Everybody's got a better word. There could be several reasons. He probably liked Daniel, because Daniel was very good at what he did. And I don't know, but when I get folks that work for me that do a very good job, I like them a lot. and try to re-recruit them as much as possible. So that had to upset him. But we're going to find out King Darius is a little deeper than that. Now, King Darius is in a pickle, and that is made very clear to him by these group of commissioners and satraps and governors and folks. And they don't say how many of them. They don't say how many of the 120 were involved, or if it was both the other two commissioners or just one of them. They don't get into that detail. I doubt it was all of them, but I'm sure there was enough to where he would have to listen. But this is King Darius. And of course they remind him, you signed it, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, it's a concrete. You're not going to change it. So, Paul would say, he was stuck between a hard place and a rock fence. Wasn't he? Personal feelings for Daniel, his signature on that paper. Wherever they did it, sealed, wax, whatever, the wax seal they used to use and things like that. So he's caught in the middle. He now has to make a decision. And of course, what's his decision? Put him in the den. But what's the thinking behind it? What's the first thing he says to Daniel as he's doing it? He said in verse 16, the king spoke and said to Daniel, your God whom you constantly serve will himself deliver you. Does he believe? I submit to you he does. I think he's and yeah, it's not your God may deliver you, but may your God deliver you. It's like I think you've got a fighting chance here. So
I think he realized that
go ahead. So, that sounds very, very, he felt, I don't know if the word's confident, but you had to know he was at least comfortable with the notion that Daniel's God would, again, he's probably no dummy. He had heard and seen things from before.
so I'm saying he knew he was the God. Because he tried, he spent all day until sundown trying to figure out a way to save him. And he couldn't figure out a way to do it. He knew he wasn't God.
And he knew, and so I wonder, did God tickle his heart a little bit and goes, I've got this? Go ahead and do this. Put him in the den. Because his reaction is, your God's going to save you. Now, throws him in the lion's den, rolls a stone over it. Everybody puts their seal on it to make sure that no one tampers with it. I'm sure it was a very ornate and kind of a little ceremonial process to do that. Then he goes home. And what does he do when he gets home? He just has a horrible night. And it's not because God's doing things to him. He is genuinely worried. So, he liked Daniel. And he knew, I think, kind of what was going to happen with his God. But deep down he was like, what have I just done? I guarantee. Well, and his reaction later kind of says that too, because he gets pretty mad at the end. But yeah, I guarantee he feels foolish. He's worried. He goes, I know what I think's going to happen, but what if it doesn't? So, they mentioned that he didn't eat, he didn't sleep. There's no entertainment brought to him. And I'm sure that was a nightly thing for the king as some kind of, dancing, music, magic show, who knows. The Royal Lippers Honor Stallions, square dancing, I don't know. But there's something every night going on. Well, he's like, no. So basically just sat in his room and brooded. Now, this is where we'll talk about King Darius a little bit. Because we kind of know what happens in the story. We've read it. I can tell Pat with a straight face that we've got chapter 6 read. So King Darius is actually mentioned several times in the Old Testament. He is instrumental in a lot of things. He was actually not the rightful heir to the Persian throne. He came to power after eliminating an impostor named Gumata, who had falsely claimed the position as the brother of the deceased Cambyses, the legitimate successor. So he was a military, he was a warrior. He had won several military conquests. He had led armies. He was apparently an incredibly excellent and effective military leader. So he became he rose to power kind of not by accident, but by a little bit of happenstance, and also taking advantage and taking advantage of a situation. So his military campaigns expanded, consolidated the Persian Empire. He apparently was his administrative abilities were unparalleled, which is why we see the satraps and the governors and the commission. He took a very big kingdom and chopped it up into bite-sized pieces so that they could run and be efficient and still work for him. He put people he trusted in positions of power. He had very ambitious building projects, which we're going to see. Yes. He really did. That's probably why his background said, okay, I need generals, colonels, all the way down to sergeants, and that way it can be people I trust, people that basically do things off the same sheet of music, because the Persian Empire is pretty big. So apparently he was a great leader. Under Darius, the Persian Empire had remarkable growth and prosperity. When I mentioned one of his notable accomplishments was that administrative structure. He also spearheaded ambitious building projects that showcased the empire's wealth and grandeur. Notably, he constructed the magnificent capital city of Persepolis, which stood as the symbol for Persian power and cultural richness. His rise to power brought stability and expansion to the empire. Military campaigns, administrative reforms, ambitious building solidified his legacy. So, that's all to say, King Darius didn't have to give a hoot about the time of day for Daniel. But he did. This great man who had conquered, who had led, who had done expansion with their kingdom, who had found ways to organize things and make them run efficiently. He didn't have to care about Daniel, but he did. To the point where he lost sleep over it. And you wonder how many times he lost sleep over things. Especially, men like that tend to sleep pretty good until something like this happens. So, but this is not the first time Darius has dealt with a Jewish God. Turn real quick to Ezra 6. And I'll do that too. This was, I gotta flip the page. So, according to the book of Ezra, King Darius plays a very pivotal role in what major activity? Anybody read ahead? Let's read together. Then King Darius issued a decree, and search was made in the archives where the treasures were stored in Babylon. In Ecbatana, in the fortress, which is the province of Media, a scroll was found, and there was written on it as follows: Memorandum. It's like memorandum. In the first year of King Cyrus, Cyrus the king issued a decree concerning the house of God at Jerusalem. Let the temple, the place where sacrifices are offered, are rebuilt, and let its foundations be retained. Its height being 60 cubits, and its width 60 cubits, 3 layers of heaped stones and 1 layer of timbers. And let the cost be paid from the royal treasury. Also let gold and silver utensils of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar took from the temple in Jerusalem and brought to Babylon, be returned and brought to their places in the temple in Jerusalem, and you shall put them in the house of God. So King Darius, the same King Darius, was the one who green-lighted rebuilding the temple. Because the governor, and I wrote his name down, I typed his name down, even not when we read my handwriting, called in the province of beyond the river, his name was Tatnai. So he expressed doubts over the legitimacy of the rebuilding of the temple project. He basically says, I don't think that was ever, King Cyrus didn't say that. So King Darius himself went and dug in the archives, found the scroll that actually literally was a memo. It's like, I don't remember how many memos I've written in my life. Never one like this, where King Cyrus said, rebuild the temple. We're paying for it. Don't get in their way. So King Darius, we'll get a little bit more insight into King Darius. He's the one that says no. It says right here to do it. So do it. To the point where, matter of fact, the funding of it was King Darius's idea. King Cyrus didn't say how to pay for it. He just said rebuild. King Darius says, you know what? You're going to rebuild it, and we're paying for it. Again, from the royal treasury. So, and to ensure the project's success and discourage any interference, King Darius issued a stern warning. Anyone who attempted to hinder the reconstruction of the temple would face the punishment of death by impaling. So we're not doing the lion's den on this one. This is a stick right through you. So it was pretty serious stuff. So this is the King Darius that is sitting up all night, worried about Daniel in the lion's den. Now we know how it turns out, thankfully, is that, this is my mental image. You know, call me crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. Where when the king got up at light, the sun barely over the horizon, that light that's not really light, but it's light enough, got up and ran to the lion's den and shouted out. What was thinking was going through his head when he shouted out to Daniel? Please answer back. Please answer back, right? I think deep down he had faith that he would, just by the way he says the question. It's like, tell me you're there. Tell me you're there. And then Daniel does. Don't you know the relief that King Darius feels right now? He was right. Daniel was right. He was right to trust that God would deliver him. Because he's the king. He could have torn up that paper. He's the king. But he took that route of trusting that Daniel's God would deliver him. And thus we shaped King Darius a little bit, don't we? And that allows him to be actually one of the great Persian kings, and actually a friend to the Jewish people. To let them rebuild their temple, rebuild Jerusalem. An excellent, an excellent advocate for. The man knew how to run an empire. Let's put it that way, and he was really good at it. Now, his relief turns into what? Starting about 23. The king said, get him out of there. Outstanding. Gave him a hug, probably. Said, good job. Thank you. You tell your God, thank you for me. That kind of thing. And then he turned and said, you know what? At the end of the day, I am the king. And he tore up that paper, essentially, about the 30-day decree of worshiping only him. So, he kind of goes mafia on him, doesn't he? Not just the folks that conspired, but their kids, their wives. I get this picture like their neighbors. You know, it's like, I'm just the guy dropping off the mail. Doesn't matter. Get in there. Throws everybody in there. And of course, unlike Daniel, where the angel had basically, closed the mouths of the lions, and it's like, oh, good kitty, just kind of pet him. They didn't even get into the den, and they were being crushed on. This is always a great story for those classes, especially when there's boys involved, because there's just carnage. It's like this, we're talking about crushing bones. So they just didn't eat them, they crushed them, and ground them up for pepper. So, not a good thing. And
Do you think that he might have been a little curious why he didn't hear that when he said
you wonder. And that's why I'm wondering, how much did God, because now God's message is even more powerful. It wasn't just king going, no, we're going to go with Daniel's God, just because I said so. Well, now he's got a case study of, yeah, Daniel's God did this. And I was hoping he would. I was confident he would. And he did. But it was Daniel's God. To the point where he does a decree, another decree. And that's in verse 25. And not just the people from Judah, the exiles, but everybody. It says to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land. That was a huge swath of people, because Persia was huge. Persia was the dominant kingdom in the world at the moment. May your peace abound. I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. And then he mentions, for he is the living God enduring forever. His kingdom is one which will not be destroyed, and his dominion will be forever. He delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and earth, who also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And then we find out that Daniel thrived under King Darius, go figure, and Cyrus the Persian. So, now, I find myself wondering, if I lived off way far and they said the God of Daniel, my question might have been, well, who's that? I think I need to find that out. Because, the Persian Empire was pretty big. So there had to have been some people that had not heard about the lion's den. So you wonder how that word spread. It doesn't really get into that, but that's just one of those things that made me curious. It's like, because he says the God of Daniel. I imagine, well, first question is, who's Daniel? Second question is, who's his God? Because it sounds like the king says, I need to obey him. So, but Darius thought enough of the situation to do that. Mm-hmm. Obviously they were, he had a fond affection for Daniel. It wasn't just a work relationship. He had an affection for him. He was genuinely worried about his health. and saved him. So yeah, I'm sure Daniel rubbed off on him. And God rubbed off on him. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's hard to think of a better mouthpiece than the king of Persia, because that's a pretty big bullhorn right there. The part where he can put out decrees going, worship this God. And Persia prospered under him. Judah prospered. It was a prosperous time. But the catalyst for all of that was following God. Mm-hmm. They always had to learn the hard way, didn't they? Yeah. And you can tell with King Darius it's genuine. The other kings, it's like, well, it's either that or I'm going to get killed, so I'll play along. I think there was more by fear. I think King Darius feared him, but King Darius respected him, and I think truly believed. This is a fascinating chapter, because most people, we just stop and start with the lion's den, which is a great kid story. You hear it from here up, from tall enough to listen to about the lion's den, and there's always pictures of Daniel walking among the lions, and they look like just giant kitty cats, right? Just, it's like you almost see him like rubbing on him like, I love you, like cats do. But the story is about Darius and Daniel's influence on him. We have 30 seconds. Any questions? This is where I go. Quibbles, qualms, quotations, queries, quandaries.
Don't let others influence and make us think more highly of ourselves than what we are.
That's what's fascinating about Daniel, is because if anybody could have got a big head, it was Daniel. And
I think that's why Darius went ahead and wrote that law, because of
yeah,
done all the damn,
yeah, and I'm sure that's how they framed it.
and then regretted
Yeah.
that decision that he made. So we need to make sure that
And deep down he thought, oh, it's only 30 days.
it's only that.
So surely Daniel will just go quiet for 30 days, and then, that first day when they came, he went, sir.
Just that you read it over and over in different stories, like
Mm-hmm.
by the young gallows, and then these snitches get thrown to the very lions that they're like to do. Anytime somebody comes against God's people, the thing that they plan is going to happen to them.
They get it back with interest, don't they? Yeah. No, it's... So we got through chapter 6. Thank you to everybody. Yes, ma'am. Because it's not lost. One of the first things Daniel did was, okay, I know what the paper says, but headed right up to the room, looked out the window, and did his thing, knowing. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate the class.